they're here. I'll put them somewhere useful when I'm done.
Welcome to you all.
Yes, thank you.
I came here mostly to display my hoodie.
I do have this on the screen. I know it's been there for a while. This is basically just images, so if you do want like a written outline, it is available on there. And I can make these available to the GI as well to have access to stuff later. So here's our actual title. So this actually came out of a class that I did for Neil, not this last summer now, but in 2018. And it was out of a blog series that I wrote for it. So as I said in the previous one, there's a long form version as well that you can read there if you would like more. So, to what lengths will you go to win, to succeed, to overcome the technical rules of whatever game you're playing in order to gain just a little bit of an advantage? Would it make a difference if the game enabled you to accomplish this task via embedded cheat codes? And do we make, or what do we make of sanctioned cheating versus unsanctioned cheating? What if you don't even know that you're circumventing the rules as intended? Well, when playing board games or card games with friends, we already know the routine. Often house rules need to be established alongside the legitimate ones because we seem to have a predisposition to games as they're presented to us. We demand that our friends and family reveal their house rules before a game even begins, lest we find out midway through that people are not actually on the same page. What happens when you land on free parking in Monopoly? I'm sure we'd all be very divided on the answer. Wait, that's cheating, we'd say, when our peers reveal themselves to be playing an entirely different game from us, all the while looking at the same board. Some strange parallel reality where someone jumps up and stops you from buying a house on your second pass of Go in Monopoly. House rules can only truly be found in board and card games because in video games, the confines of what can be changed, altered, etc. is often and is basically limited by the code of the game itself. Milton Bradley, or perhaps now Hasbro, can't actually come in and stop you from playing Monopoly as they want you to. The physical game makers scream out on the internet about how you're all doing it wrong, and yet there's nothing really that they can do about it. Whereas video games are something different entirely. And as a result, the house rules and other rules by which we define modification or cheating often become something else too. Even custom games or maps that are available in games like Overwatch or Halo these days have their rules laid out in front. People know exactly what they're getting into when they log into these maps. No matter how much code is added or what's changed, games as shipped remain tied to the design philosophies and ideologies of the developers who made them, even when we're given the tools to customize that experience. This leaves us with the concepts of sanctioned versions of cheating or modding, that which is provided to us or at least endorsed by developers, versus unsanctioned cheating, that which is accepted outside, allowed or otherwise not necessarily endorsed by developers. To put this in these terms makes it seem as though it's easily cut and dry, but as we'll soon explore, these divisions are complicated between different games and their players. In the hazy confusion, cheating takes on an uncertain and liminal place. For our purposes, social liminality should be understood as that gray area between our larger concepts of cheating and modding, outside of necessarily gaming, a place in which these terms are often used interchangeably in a video game context, depending on what's going on, and there are no clear or easy definitions of what's determining which name is applied. This is in contrast to many other forms of play where the fuzziness is often greatly reduced. It's relational, transitional, and most importantly, it's a state of being. What it means to cheat in a video game now is pretty far removed from how it all began. In order to understand where we are, we need to remember where we've been. So I'm sure all of you, or at least most of you, have heard of or used the Konami or Contra code, or some variation of it, perhaps even the sound test level select from Sonic 2. Earlier video games had a plethora of sanctioned cheats like this, aka those cheat codes or built-in ways of circumventing the standard play of a given title. These cheat codes were primarily instituted by the game developers for playtesting purposes. Having unlimited lives is a really good idea if your job is to potentially find glitches via death in Sonic. But they remained in these games after launch. Through great sleuthing by video game fans, alongside strategy guides, official magazines like Nintendo Power, we see perhaps the beginning of the approved cheating culture surrounding games. Through scribblings in the back of Blockbuster rental game books, whispering between friends, alongside those posts that were in magazines like Nintendo Power, this pseudo-mythological state of cheat code possibility was born. And it felt like everyone was on the lookout for the next thing that they could share with their friends. Of course, these officially left-in cheat codes weren't the only ways that players found to modify their gaming experience. There are also examples of more unsanctioned and early soft modding experiences too, through devices like the Game Genie. From its inception, the Game Genie was already pretty comfortable in navigating the liminal space of the cheating realm, with one side of Nintendo persecuting them and not wanting them anywhere near their games, whereas Sega was promoting and praising them as long as they interacted with games that weren't capable of saving. Sega's approach to modifying a game as intended suggests that these early cheat codes, even via third-party options like the Game Genie, were meant to help players bypass unwanted content when saving along the way was not an option. Even today, many games take a similar stance to cheating and modding, preventing players from gaining achievements or trophies when they use them. Although there are still mods that allow you to re-enable that feature, so that's not kind of a line in the sand. All of this, of course, only considers soft modding or cheating, rather than hard modification of actual hardware, which naturally complicates things further beyond what we have time to cover in this small window of time. Ultimately, though, it seems even at this stage, we just can't seem to let games be. While we may see fewer official cheat codes today, with the exception of games like The Sims 4, we instead see options for mods and console commands. But one game's mod is another game's cheat. Gone are the days of mythological cheat codes and glitches recounted in astonishment in a friend's basement. Instead, we now constantly share and update gaming strategies through YouTube, game FAQs, and a million other places online. So much so that well-known bugs and glitches and Easter eggs are often dispelled online at meme-level popularity and renown. Secrets aren't so secret anymore. Yet, just as the need to cheat was there in the beginning, so too do we still seem to modify and adapt the games that we're given. One thing, though, that should be discussed now when we consider these social contexts of cheating is that cheating is often defined and persecuted because it's believed to be a means to make things easier, or rather to avoid failure, as we see in Jesper Juul's The Art of Failure. He comments that while we generally avoid failure in our daily lives, we often seek out games that ultimately provide some kind of failure, even though we would otherwise avoid it in real life. Interestingly, though, we often fail to remember that cheating, modding, and even hacking video games can make games easier or harder. This plays in with our notion of what it means to cheat at all. DeKoven says cheating is what someone does to give him or herself a more than even chance to win. So how are we even cheating if the goal has nothing to do with winning at all? This is part of why the place of cheating and modding currently can't seem to escape this liminal place. There doesn't seem to be any concrete answer. Commonly, though, when we make things easier on ourselves by cheating or modding in a game, we are usually socially considered to be failing in the real world. By neglecting to play the game as intended, we are believed to be circumventing any real engagement with the content, failing in order to win. While you may feel no guilt or remorse for cheating, you will always be aware that you cheated, even if it was only once. The social understanding would have us believe that our entire experience is now tainted by the act of cheating in the first place. However, a large portion of the modding and cheating we see today, despite the social understanding, seems to occur because we as gamers rise to the challenge to challenge the games themselves or see more potential in them than what the developers gave to us in the first place. Options like mods for survival mode in Skyrim offer the chance to make meaning out of objects, settings, or scenarios that you wouldn't otherwise be able to experience or feel are lacking. So you actually have to drink or eat in order to not die, making more than just giving you HP points because you happen to be out of potions in Skyrim. In other cases, though, we may cheat because the game is broken. This is a very common occurrence in Bethesda games, as I'm sure we're mostly all aware. So, for example, when I first started playing Skyrim, the first edition on my Xbox 360, I got lost in the flow and wasted a huge number of hours out in the mountains, as we've all done, I'm sure, many, many times over now. When I wrote this, I even listened to like the game soundtrack, because at this point it just has that lovely, background noise. So I was seriously invested. And after too many hours to be able to really reset at that point, I encountered a game-breaking bug where I was unable to progress the main storyline past where I wanted to go with a particular faction I had aligned myself with. And I wasn't about to go back and reset the game at that point. So I didn't want to join the opposite faction because I had decided that character was not having what they had to offer. So instead, I went to the internet and found a way to port my 360 save to a PC version of the game, and then convert it, the 360 version to the PC version, console command my way past that broken quest line, which is only like 2 stages down, port it back to 360, and then start playing again on 360. Which allowed me to continue on my happy way without changing anything else, just allowing me to progress past the limitations of what 360 could offer. Because as far as I'm aware, there was no console available on that system. So the question comes from that story, right, of do I feel guilty about the fact that I cheated in this way? Does it taint my memories of the game? Well, not really. I always know I did it. But I feel justified in my reasoning behind progressing the save, and while my 360 achievements never blinked an eye because nothing really changed as far as that was concerned, I was still saddened that it was something I was forced to do because the game itself was broken. So while toying with Bethesda bugs like this is something that the modding community is very well invested in, to the point of releasing unofficial patches to fix bugs, particularly with games like Skyrim, Fallout, etc., there's just something to be said for cheating justification in gaming. And that's not even something that just is coming from the developer side. That's things we impose ourselves on the choices that we make to make these alterations. What's acceptable to modify, or how one chooses to cheat within the gaming community, is vastly different depending on what kind of game it is too. So solo games versus multiplayer games, online versus offline, you can go far into lower levels for that too. Basically, even the pedigree or the age of a game can affect how players see deviation from the scripted norm. On Twitch, you have people who have random number generated components for things like Ocarina of Time, so that there's random stuff that they wouldn't expect to see if they can still get through the game or if it fundamentally is broken. But because of its age and that context, it's okay. So I regret there's not more on that subject I can talk about, but suffice to say, we've moved far beyond scribbling in blockbuster game books. So while it might be front and center on their website now, the Sims franchise used to have its own share of community-shared and pseudo-mythological cheating console commands in circulation. The existence of easy-to-remember codes like Rosebud, Kashing with a K, or Motherlode with an E always seemed to suggest that developers intended to give these tools to players without having to outright say so. Further still, there are plenty of changes to the base game in the early franchise installments which required access in console commands. Features like halting aging, once relegated to cheating, is now a click box away in the standard game menu of The Sims 4. Has the cheat been saved from the taint it once endured because of this? Honestly, I mean, even with a simple example like this, these kinds of cheat codes can even, can these kinds of cheat codes even be considered cheating if they're actually part of the gameplay? EA has condoned the use of these cheats as an active alternative to base play. as you can see from this screenshot from their website as of like 2 years ago. By doing this, they are acknowledging a number of ways to consume their content. The Sims also has generated an extremely active modding community, going so far as to provide desired features before the developers themselves actually include them. Or for the example of Sims 4, a lot of people including things that are from previous games that might not even show up. So there is an inherent accepting of both cheating and modification within the game itself, and by extension, the community. A philosophy whose origins can be traced back actually to Will Wright at Maxis and the dawn of the franchise itself. Following this line of thinking, it's not surprising that modern-day simmers have no trouble citing cheats they're using, like move objects on, having access to debug items, etc., because they believe these things to be okay because EA left them in. It's become such a norm that when watching any speed build or other type videos surrounding this game, you'll hear builders comment on how much of a necessity these cheats are. It's gone so far as to the fact that there's actually challenges to not use these cheats, and they often comment on the difficulties of lacking the freedom of not having access to do the kinds of things they're used to. The game as intended is no longer the game they want it to be. Or perhaps there are many different types of that game that's housed within the same code. Perhaps it's as simple as just changing the difficulty from easy to legendary. Cheat codes like this may be simply considered as different sides of the same base game. It's how people build their narratives, for that matter, not so much how they got there. At least for The Sims. After all, The Sims was never supposed to be just about what stories Maxis and later EA could tell you. Instead, these are stories that you tell yourself. Part of this meant allowing for as broad of a possibility space as the code could provide, where those borders could no longer contain the possibility, but rather that the community took over where those boundaries started. This way, The Sims, in principle, can never be modded or cheated too far and be considered a failure. The inclusion of these things from the game's very inception presupposes that we might not even have a word for their use within the game system. As much as it's hard to call endorsed cheating, it can equally be hard to call the inclusion of mods when they fulfill, enhance, or extend the game's prime directive as cheating. Even when you include custom content, script mods, etc., they are merely adding to the framework that EA already offered in the first place. I have yet to hear a simmer call inclusion of these things as cheating in a negative way, but rather that they seem to accept it as part of the game experience. They simply use this term because we don't really have another word for what they're doing at this point. In contrast, though, The Sims' stance on cheating and modification, you have games like World of Warcraft and other MMOs that have a much heavier hand. Mods in WoW toe a very fine line between acceptable and bannable offense. Generally, over time, Blizzard Entertainment has taken strides to limit what mods can and cannot do in their game in order to limit how mods can help or hinder the player experience. Whereas The Sims is about expanding one's possibility space via cheats and community content, WoW is about delivering their content through a myriad of lenses, so long as it doesn't give any one player significant advantage. As WoW is a web-based, always online game with achievements, the need to control cheating is paramount and judged accordingly. Even if a mod arguably only affects your experience, like hacking the virtual skins of your characters on your own game files so that only you can see it, is deemed a bannable offense, which actually happened to a friend of mine back in Burning Crusade. Along the same lines, though, while there are no mods allowed that give a significant advantage to one player or another, the community, particularly the high-end rating or PvP communities, have deemed a number of mods indispensable or effectively required in order to proceed through the stock client. Many of these essential mods are aimed at modifying and improving user experience for difficult content. Mods like Deadly Boss mods or Bigwigs give players access to boss timers, debuff and ability announcements, and often even giving players cooldown notifications when facing difficult foes in large groups. This kind of information can be argued to be indispensable, and yet it's not something that is truly included in the base game. You have visual cues or audio cues given by the bosses when they're about to slam a frontal cone into your face, but the average player base believes that they benefit from having DBM on their side in order to give them a 10-second heads up to hopefully move out of that cone. And they don't always do it. So installing mods in this way is observed by the community almost as a rite of passage, essentially not only in what needs to be downloaded, but that something has to be downloaded at all in order to experience these things. And unlike The Sims, all mods are governed outside of the Blizzard umbrella, currently primarily through the Twitch client, formerly through Curse. Although you could install them manually, which I don't recommend. So what the WoW example asks us then, however, is how much of a game has to change before it ceases to be the original game. In this example, Blizzard limits what can be done with mods enough that the game is required to stay more or less the same in terms of narrative and basic interaction on the live client. What changes is how people interact with that world, how people in this context come to divide modding from cheating. One final and slightly more controversial example of modding and cheating is through yet another Bethesda title, through Fallout 4. The version of Fallout 4 that the community wants you to play is often vastly different from the original one produced by Bethesda. In addition to audio-visual overhauls, character model and NPC improvements, minor UI tweaks, mods often offer a monumental amount of features and bug fixes that were left hanging by Bethesda. Quest design, loading screens, new user-designed quests, basically you name it, somebody's made a mod for it. It's interesting to note, though, that while I'm saying mod to describe what's available on Nexus, which is a giant list that's on this screen, in truth, some of them can also be classified as cheats, and generally speaking, we're back to that problematic division of cheating versus modification. It's no wonder that Bethesda turns off achievements for players with modifications enabled, although Fallout 4 is one of those ones with the script editor that allows you to turn them back on again. With any number of mods enabled, even Bethesda seems to believe that having them changes the games enough that achievements are no longer valid when obtained with a modded system. People cheat in and modify games for any number of reasons, primarily in finding new ways to explore the ideal user experience. This should autoplay, but oh, it is. There we go. There's no sound, though, so you can look it up if you'd like later. Through these changes, they reinforce community understanding of what it means to cheat. With Fallout 4 and Skyrim, they allow for much larger changes to their core code than, say, The Sims 4, World of Warcraft, or Sonic 2. Their interpretations of what cheating means remains contextually tied to the game itself. The concept of cheating and its modding cousin remain in this fuzzy limbo state of brushing up against what it means to be socially accepted in order to experiment with the profane and different. What does seem to be a common factor, though, in understanding why one community's cheat is another community's mod is perhaps due to heicity, which I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. How much can be altered before the thisness of the game is gone? Mods in The Sims feed into the essence of the game, whereas in Fallout or Skyrim, the core essence is more subjective and potentially up for debate. Thus, the mods and the cheats are as well. It's precisely the problem when we see the result of Bethesda releasing games like Skyrim, re-released updated editions. This is actually a trailer that's supposed to be a parody of it being released on literally every device it could possibly be, of which Skyrim is particularly bad. At the time of my blog series, actually, there was even going around on social media that Bethesda basically stated they're going to continue porting it to every single thing they can as long as people continue to buy it. But in the context of that series and of this talk, my first question was, what version of Skyrim is that anyway? Audio-visual overhauls, these bug fixes, etc., many of these things had already been done by the modding community, but were now re-released for new consumption. Also, 2, the game on 360 or PC or the fridge, in this case, would be vastly different from each other. So where's the line of how we define what the same game is? Hiding somewhere between this, somewhere in this fog with our notion of cheating and modding, most likely. Ultimately, while we may cheat, modify, and break games for any number of inherent human desires to do so, the core of this confusion between cheating and modding relies upon the question, is a game only what it's produced to be, or should we begin to consider all changes, modifications, cheats, and adaptations to be part of the ephemeral haecicity that surrounds the initial game's code? If we can adopt house rules as a relatively standard deviation from normal rules, and if luxury tax gets paid out to free parking on the regular, maybe modding and cheating aren't so bad. Maybe they find ways to help us make use of our game worlds just a little bit longer. Or maybe it's simply a way for a gaming community to participate in the development world beyond passive engagement. As de Koven states, I am aware that the motivation for your sudden intensity stems not much from your concern that I have broken a rule, as from your feeling that I have somehow deprived you of your opportunity to win. If cheating is just a socially agreed upon set of rules and conditions of play, then what does it matter if no one's around to really see you do it? And I'm going to drink coffee now. Are there questions or comments? Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, I'm hoping you can expand a little bit on this how-form thought. The idea of cheating through the use of bugs that are already in the game, specifically for online games, things like WoW, things like Destiny, where there are raids and big community team events, where all it takes is one or two people to decide to cheat, how that affects the rest of the team. Mm-hmm. Like thinking about your background in communities and fans as much as in the modding and cheating of it.
I have a lot of examples of where that's happened in WoW in particular. I know in Wrath of the Lich King, there's a few that happened in that expansion. But one in particular where somehow somebody had done an item restore with a game master, and they received a tabard that was only supposed to be given to game masters. So it basically had God mode enabled, that if they used the special effect on the tabard, it would wipe out anything within a radius. And of course, because they were brilliant and thinking they could get away with it, they went into the current raid tier and wiped out bosses that they weren't supposed to be able to access. As a result, not just the people who were in the raid group at the time, which then would have been about 25 people, I think it was a heroic 25, the entire guild got banned for at least a month. And even people who weren't even online when this incident happened, because theoretically they all could have been privy to the fact that this person had that item. Conversely, the clever use of game mechanics mantra that they like to use a lot is usually when something is broken in the game, like it's happened where an enemy before the boss has a certain ability that could be stolen and saved till the boss, and then it would basically wipe out the boss faster than it should have been wiped out. But those people normally only get temporarily banned, or if they make progress because of it, they'll rescind the progress. It happens a lot in World First things where you have teams going towards it. So there doesn't seem to be a really easily definable thing. Shock. But Blizzard seems to have eased up a little bit, so long as it's something that is an error in the code, or again, clever use of game mechanics as a phrase, hints at the boundary of where they sit. Yeah, that's what I got. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if your research has extended at all to hardware around controller interfaces. So when someone uses an accessibility controller, something that's designed or modified, maybe by themselves, maybe even officially by a company, like Microsoft has an accessibility controller, are they then banned from certain play modes? Like, how is this being dealt with? If you've seen it, I don't know. I haven't.
So I actually met somebody back in Overwatch beta. I don't know if he's still around now, but he only had one arm. And so he it limited the characters that he could play in Overwatch as a result, but my understanding is his was completely fine because it was on PC. However, there's a lot of discussion around the Xbox One and I think it's on Xbox One, at least the PS4 version of Overwatch, because a lot of people are like, hey, I can plug in a keyboard and a mouse to a PS4. Can I play Overwatch with that? And Blizzard has come right out and said that while they can't really ban people for it, they think it's against the spirit of the game to be playing in that format because it allows you to have much more control. And as somebody who primarily plays it on PC, and when I go to a PS4, I feel like I've never picked up a controller before in my life. It's a hard line to draw, especially for like accessibility reasons. So I think as long as it's, again, in the spirit of the game, right? Or if it's not if it's evening the playing field, I don't think it would probably be considered that way. But again, it's so dependent. Yeah.
So I was thinking, thank you for your talk. I was thinking about how a lot of the theorization around what is cheating is written by scholars of a certain era who are writing specifically about single player console games and then moving from modding to the modding stuff is on MMOs on PCs. Is there theorization or literature about cheating in things like mobile social games? Is that like a concept that isn't taken up in the same way, right? Like how do our definitions of cheating change with the actual physical infrastructure of what we're using?
When I did the research for this, I didn't come across anything specifically about mobile games, but I wouldn't be surprised if, unfortunately, there isn't even that much about them because mobile games tend to take a very, and I'm sure you're aware of this, like where they fit in, not just in terms of like gamer talk, but also in terms of academic focus, that a lot of mobile games are treated as unfortunately lesser, even though they often take even more attention than, you know, other more formal games do. So I'd actually be really curious to look up that question. So thank you for bringing that forward. I don't have an answer for you, but I'm interested. Yeah.
So this is likely very obvious, but I'm excited to ask it anyway. How does all of this stuff relate to esports where suddenly there's money on the line? Because with The Sims, there doesn't seem to be a competitive aspect. So does it feel surprising that they welcome modding in the community? But then, like, esports is the complete extreme of that. Like, how have they adapted to cheating and modding into the way that they've established?
Harshly. Harshly is the answer. Surprisingly, there actually is a competitive element to The Sims. It's where a lot of the challenges come in. There's like official, like, I keep wanting to say Maxis, but EA like has official challenges and different limitations and stuff like that. But in terms of esports, it really depends. It's all game specific, right? Especially for those ones. But I know there are circumstances where, for example, like with Smash Brothers, and a lot of those tournaments, you'll have certain game pads that are accepted versus ones that aren't. That's a more hardware thing, but you could still argue that to use a game pad that's either neither approved nor not approved, right? Like, so if they haven't figured it out yet, could still be considered as cheating because it might allow for people to have greater dexterity or be able to switch between things or whatever else easier. In terms of shooters, for the most part, things like, you know, even Halo or Overwatch are really, really strict that you basically can't change anything. And if you are expected that you have an aim assist that allows you to, you know, do headshots or something easier, that you could be like instantly pulled out. Plus a lot of the higher end competitions, they're doing it on like tournament computers and stuff like that. So they don't really have the chance to be able to tweak anything the same beyond, you know, changing keybinds and stuff like that to what they're used to, or like sensitivities. Basically, if it's not included in the client, they can't do it. Am I supposed to end?
Last question.
You can also feel free to like email me after the fact. I do have cards that I'll put on the table over there, but I'm happy to reach out more. Again, this is a passion project. My stuff deals with like communities and World of Warcraft for the most part, but I participate in this a lot too. So it turned into an entire like 4,000 word blog series. So there you go.
Per Neil's preamble and introduction, why don't you mention that you also do community experience curation?
Yeah, so it's a recently, as of September, formal position here at the Games Institute. I am the Community Experience Curator, which has a long-term plan of helping to foster more casual as well as research-based interdisciplinary community here, because we have so many different labs and groups that don't always talk to each other. And so my role is to bring everybody together to not feel like we're all in separate pod groups. So the main initiative that's happening right now is the development of a official Games Institute Discord server, which is in it's not in a closed beta. If you have access to it, it's great. But it is in beta, so things are still being tweaked. But the idea is to have a place where like all the podcast updates, the news that we post on Twitter, on Instagram, everything, it auto-populates FPS we have on there. We have HCI through there, literally everything. If you have news or an organization that you want me to put up through our Discord or want access to it, please feel free to ask. There will be an official launch later. But for now, we're going to move away from the Slack component because it's a lot easier to set up. Most people involved in games have Discord already anyway, so it's really easy just to add another server to it. So that's basically where we're at, is in terms of setting up and running the Discord component with more events later. Yeah.
Oh, so quick question back to the top of the top.
Yeah.
So I know historically WoW's gone through different transition periods. So when it first launched in Classic WoW, there was basically it was a mod you could install, a buddy you could would find people in your raid that have a debuff and cleanse them.
Yep.
Then they banned it out.
Yep.
And how do communities react when basically the definition of what is considered allowed and not allowed shifts?
Interestingly, to say the least. So I actually started playing myself in Burning Crusade, so I didn't live through the Healbot destruction or when it was gutted quite the same, but I think it was in either Warlords of Draenor or in Legion, there was a mod that a mod component that tagged into an existing one that still is there called Exorcist Raid Tools that basically did like a graphical interface if you had it installed. So I need both hands for this. So basically, say there's a boss mechanic that requires everybody in the raid to be spread apart so many feet, and if people clash together, they kill each other. So you need to have everybody know where they're going and have it be consistent. So the raid leader could actually put assignments in to this tool, and it would shoot out to everybody who had the mod as well. And then when that moment in the fight happened, an arrow would pop up on your screen and show you exactly where you needed to go. And that's no longer possible. They took out the ability to do that in the game. And it's created a bit of chaos as a result because people got so used to it. And that's the thing where when it's something that people rely on, it really makes people upset when it does happen, but they don't really have any recourse. There's very few things that Blizzard has taken away that has been put back in because of community feedback. For the most part, they're like, we don't intend this to be a thing because it basically makes it not quite botting because you have to do it yourself manually, but take some of the skill check out of it, and I think that might be the line. They have added things into the game, though, that were originally mods, which is an interesting thing as well, although people still often use the mod anyway because it's better. Thank you. Cool. Anything else? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Jen.
Thank you all for being here and also for your questions. I'm really awkward with this, so I have nothing else to say.
Everybody can go and enjoy some coffee and sit down and do whatever.
Turn off McAfee.